welcome to the intersection of city politics and everyday life. I'm Brian Lehrer. Today it's the intersection of construction cranes on every corner, or so it seems, and new housing not keeping up with the need. It's the intersection of a housing shortage for families with children, while the new building is mostly studios and one-bedrooms. And it's the intersection of new units renting for $400 a month more than existing ones. That's 8 times the difference between the new and old housing in the year 2000. These are all facts, and not alternative ones, found in a major new report from NYU's Furman Center, which studies housing in the city. They almost make you ask, why build at all? With our guests, we'll consider these trends and look at some graphics that show more fascinating, if disturbing, changes in the housing picture and what the city might actually be able to do about it. Joining us, Purnima Kapur, Executive Director of the Department of City Planning and a key player in the mayor's affordable housing efforts. Before that job, she directed the department's Brooklyn Planning Office. With us as well, Michelle De La Us, a planning commissioner. She's also executive director of the nonprofit Fifth Avenue Committee. Among many community efforts, it develops affordable housing in South Brooklyn. She also directs Neighbors Helping Neighbors, which advocates for people facing housing issues. Also, we're delighted to have at our table Rachel Fee, executive director of the New York Housing Conference, whose nonprofit mission is to advance city, state, and federal policies in an effort to bring affordable housing to all New Yorkers. Welcome, all of you. Thank you very much for joining us. We're going to build this around some slides from a presentation that the Furman Center put together to go with their new report. And we're going to put up the first slide right now, and it shows that there are 19% more housing units today, or in 2016, than in 1970. Then the next slide, by comparison, growth, however, slowed after the year 2000. So let's just stop for a minute and take stock of that. Ms. Kapur, it looks like 19% sounds like a lot of new housing. And I think a lot of people have an experience of New York since the Bloomberg years, and maybe even going back to the Giuliani years, that it's cranes, 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 construction, 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 disruption, 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 but we still have a housing shortage. Are there fewer new units than there are people?
I think that, we have been as a city growing in the last decade and growing dramatically. We are at 8.6 million people. All of our boroughs, even the Bronx at this point, is close to its all-time high. Our jobs are growing. We have almost 4.5 million jobs today in New York, which means that New York, with the low crime rates and all the good things that have been happening in the city for a long time, has become a really attractive place for people to be in. We are not only growing with people wanting to come live in the city. For the first time, we are also growing because our birth rate is higher than people that are moving out of the city or longer life expectancy. So we are a growing city. We are also an aging city. I think it's the combination of all of those that creates the housing shortage that you see.
For the two of you, are we not building enough housing, or are we building the wrong kind of housing? Or why aren't we keeping up?
Well, we're mostly not keeping up with families that have the greatest need. So in addition to the 19% increase, we've also lost hundreds of thousands of units of rent-stabilized housing that has largely been affordable to the lowest income families in New York City. So New York City has had an affordable housing crisis for many generations at that point. It's one of the reasons why we have rent stabilization, because our vacancy rate is less than 5%. And in rent stabilized housing, the vacancy rate hovers around 2%. So really the challenge is about building and preserving affordable housing, preserving what we have and building at levels that will be affordable to low and moderate income families in particular.
And what happened after 2000? This is the Bloomberg and de Blasio period. and they both have these massive, Bloomberg had, de Blasio has these massive numbers of hundreds of thousands of new or preserved affordable housing units that we always hear about, and all these cranes, but growth slowed after 2000. How do you explain it?
So I think when you look at it in terms of the housing units that have been added and the population growth that Purnima mentioned, then we also have another factor going on. Part of it is the aging population, and part of it is more people living on their own. So we actually have a growth in the number of households. So these are, separate households that are all seeking housing. So you have supply increasing, but at a faster rate. You have population growth, and then also this explosion in the number of households in New York City. So, and I think as Michelle pointed out, we need to be building, but building affordable housing, right, is really part of the issue here. And I think the mayor's housing plan is really, a step in the right direction. We have a really substantial commitment of capital investment. We have some exciting new proposals like mandatory inclusionary housing, which I don't think this report really captures the effects of yet. Yeah. But I feel a little bit optimistic about some of the other slides you're probably going to show, and how we can project into the future. And what changes we hope to see.
And I would add to that if you look at the more recent numbers, the numbers for 2017 of total housing growth as well as affordable housing are very, very encouraging. I think we've started to sort of see more aggressive housing construction numbers with all of the efforts that the city and everyone else has been involved with in emphasizing also the production of affordable housing as we produce more housing.
Now, as we go to the next slide, we will see that even as housing is in increasingly short supply, or just as short supply as it had been, a growing share of units are classified as vacant. About 3% are vacant and available for rent. Another 8% or 7.9% classified as vacant and unavailable for rent or sale in 2016. That's grown in the last few years. Is that Airbnb? Is that Russian oligarchs buying up the fancy ones?
I think we have to remember that New York City is a global city, and so we don't have a normal real estate market. We have a market that, especially at the high end, is largely driven by investors as opposed to people, normal everyday people who want to own or rent their home. And so especially with the number of vacant and unavailable, that number has grown by nearly 60,000 units in 2 years to 248,000. That's a lot of pied-à-terres. That's a lot of folks who don't live here, but decided to invest in real estate because they thought it was a good way to have their investment grow. And that's a tremendous number of units. We have about 64,000 people in the New York City shelter system. That's more than enough units to house every single one of those homeless families.
Is that something that the city needs to address at the policy level, the growing vacancy rate, and especially if 8% are unavailable for rent or sale, assuming they're not in some kind of disrepair or being constructed, something's changing and it contributes to the problem. Does the city need to address this at the policy level?
Yeah, I think we need to look a little more closely at what those units are and why they are vacant and unavailable. I think there was a rush to build as 421A was expiring a year and a half
that
ago.
Tax break for
yes,
a lot of
for a lot of the construction. So a lot of buildings vested at that point. A lot of them are coming on the market now. So I am not sure if, I'm sure there's a share of those that are the pied-à-terres and housing units that ought to be in the market and are not. But I'm not sure that this is. We don't know yet. Yeah.
But I would add, it is something we should be looking at, and there could be a policy solution here. So we certainly don't want to be encouraging or having, a tax incentive to buy this, not pay real estate taxes potentially, and just hold this as an investment asset when we have a crisis. We have a housing crisis. We need these affordable, or not affordable, we need these units available in the market,
yes.
right?
And you had a stat from 2014 that shows how much vacancy has expanded in just a 2-year period. Do you have that?
Yeah, well, yes, the number of units that were vacant and unavailable in 2014 were 182,600 units, and today the 2016 report from Furman shows 248,000. So as I said, it's the difference is a little over 60,000 units. So it's very significant.
That's very significant in just a 2-year time.
Exactly.
All right, next slide. And Rachel, you were talking about this before, I think, or something related to it. Recently built units are more likely to be studios or 1-bedrooms. Now, does this indicate a shortage of units being built for families of larger sizes, or does this meet the need because more people, as you say, are forming households, so more people are living alone or in smaller groupings?
Yeah, I think that this is developers responding to the market need, and you have a lot of people living alone, and there's high demand for that. I think that developers also are looking at their profit margin of, what kind of mix of single, 1 and 2 bedrooms makes sense, and where that leaves them at the end of the day. But certainly the demographics are showing that we have a lot of single households that do need this housing. I would just add, I think the other real need here is affordable senior housing. We have an aging population, and for folks that are living alone now, but maybe would be more suitable in an affordable senior situation, it's something we should be building for and really planning for.
Is that something that policy can encourage?
Yes, I think we are encouraging senior housing. There are programs that HPD has created particularly for affordable senior housing, SARA program. I think part of it is also the city stepping in to fill the gaps for funding that used to be available from other sources, largely the federal government, that is no longer available in addressing those needs. I think that our affordable housing needs and our housing needs are at every economic strata and at every demographic. And so, we're trying to sort of address it in a way that can respond to all of that.
While I would agree that the needs are at every economic strata, the needs are greatest among the poorest families. And I think that is the most significant issue when you have over 25% of the New York City population who isn't eligible for any mandatory inclusionary housing unit or not eligible for many of the HPD funded programs. People get extremely frustrated, and they're like, they're not building for me. And so when they see construction that's going on in the community around them, people are understandably like, this is just going to increase displacement pressure. The new units aren't going to be affordable to me. Why should I support this?
Right. In fact, the next slide goes to that very question. This shows the most building permits in the years 2015 to 17 were in the same neighborhoods as were growing the fastest since the year 2000. So it's the neighborhoods in the darkest red, and you can see those are the wealthier neighborhoods of the city. It's Manhattan, below Harlem, it's inner Brooklyn and inner Queens, it's northeast Queens like Bayside and Little Neck, a more affluent area. It's the North Shore of Staten Island and then the South Shore of Staten Island. So does this indicate that the housing that's being built really is being built for the more affluent people and winds up pushing up the average price of housing rather than meeting supply and demand, which would, in the economics textbooks, seem to push the price down?
So I think what we have seen through the Bloomberg era and continuing into the de Blasio era is a lot of emphasis on building affordable housing. However, we also, as Michelle was pointing out, lost a lot of existing affordable housing through a variety of measures, many of them totally legal and allowed today. And I think this administration has really started to focus a lot more on preservation of affordable housing through a variety of ways. We've also strengthened some of the state laws on vacancy decontrol. HPD is
Much more to
really
do.
aggressively, absolutely, there's always more to do. But, HPD is aggressively going after people that are abusing the tax credits they get for affordable housing. We are producing a lot more affordable housing. I think we need to build more. We can build for, I think there's like a relationship between the income groups that are affected the most are always the ones at the bottom of the chain. But the way they get affected really is when you have people who have the ability to pay even a little bit more than they can, they are displaced. So unless you build housing that is available to that middle range as well, you're in some
Right.
ways not protecting people.
But
that
your
are
groups also represent nonprofit builders, and there are advocates who say, forget about all this massive building with the mandatory inclusionary housing for a zoning change so you can build higher. That's just going to be maybe 30% of the new units affordable. The 70% are still going to be at market rate, so the net effect is going to be pushed up. So some of the activists say, forget about the market, just create, instead of as many more units, just the nonprofit affordable units for a while.
I mean, we need to take a very, very detailed approach. I mean, I think part of the strategy should be to upzone in areas where the market in those areas can cross-subsidize the mandatory inclusionary housing units without additional taxpayer subsidy. And in neighborhoods that are currently affordable, where there's naturally occurring affordable housing that's unregulated or where there's a high concentration of rent-regulated housing, that is where the city, I believe, would be better served in partnering with developers, certainly nonprofit developers, to preserve the existing affordable housing and partner with existing owners in those communities to build 100% deeply affordable housing. So the strategy, I'm not saying that the strategy that the de Blasio administration is wrong. I think it's about where to concentrate the new development, which neighborhoods should go first in terms of new development that are going to produce new affordable housing without increasing displacement risk, and then focusing the taxpayer investment in low-income communities, primarily communities of color, on preservation of existing affordable housing and building 100% as much as possible deeply affordable housing.
Anything to add on this? Because it's such a central question, and neighborhood after neighborhood is resisting the building of massive new housing.
Mm-hmm.
I think we can't leave the affordable units on the table. If we have the opportunity under mandatory inclusionary to cross-subsidize, as Michelle is saying, right? We're using the market to leverage affordable housing. We need to really grab onto that. And I think also you have to think about, these are strong markets where you're able to cross-subsidize. You're now creating affordable housing in communities where land costs are so outrageous, we would never have a shot at building affordable housing. So I think it's really important that we're really seizing that opportunity of mandatory inclusionary housing and leveraging that where we can. And I think Michelle is also right that, and the city is doing this, we need to be investing in communities in the 5 boroughs. We need more affordable housing in every borough.
Let's go to another slide. There are more adult-only households in the city than before. We've been talking about that. So we're going to go on to the next slide, which indicates adult-only households are getting bigger. Is this a function of overcrowding?
Partly. I mean, I think it would be interesting, honestly, is to look at this and break it down by incomes of families and by communities. So in some cases, it may be, older, kids moving back in with their parents after they finish school because the costs of living in New York City are so high, and the only way to do it is to move back in with mom or dad. I can tell you that Fifth Avenue Committee, we own and manage housing, and we definitely have, as families are getting displaced from other housing, they're moving into the affordable housing that Fifth Avenue Committee owns and manages for sure. And then I think as people get older, sometimes, adult children move back in to help care for adults. So I think all of those things are going on, and I think different things may be going on in different income groups or in different communities.
And the Furman report concludes with a slide that is simply a question, and the question that confronts all of us is, what kind of city do we want to be? Let me throw that around the table a little bit with respect to housing and what it suggests about, just the quality of life and who lives here and everything else. What kind of city do we want to be?
I think we want to continue to be a city that is welcoming of people from within the United States, from outside. We've been an immigrant city for generations. We have been a city that has people from many different economic strata sharing many amenities. I think we need to continue to make sure that we provide economic integration, racial integration. We also provide services. So we provide services to communities as we think about housing, and we've been very focused on that as we've done neighborhood planning, bringing better quality schools, bringing better open space, bringing better transit access, bringing access to jobs. We now have, the mayor announced the New York Works program, which is really sort of attacking affordability from the other end. It's producing affordable housing, but then also making sure our people are able to make enough money to afford some of that housing. So we want to really continue to focus on equity, focus on affordability, focus on a city that is multilingual, multicultural, multiracial, and vibrant.
Anybody?
I mean, what hasn't come up in the conversation today, but is vitally important to the kind of city that we want to have, is certainly public housing. A significant percentage, between the public, the folks that live in public housing, the nearly 400,000, plus the number of folks who have, housing vouchers through the Public Housing Authority, it's nearly 600,000 people, and the Housing Authority and the folks that live in public housing in New York City are a vital component of the city. And the NYCHA has a significant capital needs gap that needs to be addressed, and that has to be a priority. And we need to think about, as we think about rezoning communities, how to leverage those rezonings and every other tool possible to help preserve that public housing.
And another thing that we haven't brought up yet is homelessness. And homelessness has been rising, even as construction has been rising. Have we seen things revealed in this report, or that you knew before, that indicates why homelessness is hitting 60,000 people is the number we always hear in the shelters currently?
So this report noted that it was a 77% increase in homelessness from the year 2000. And it's just really shocking. We know that we've been hitting these record highs. I think a couple things. I think it really underscores the importance of preserving public housing, as Michelle mentioned, right? About 12% of our housing stock is public housing and other subsidized. We really need to preserve every single unit there. So I think the city focusing on that and figuring out how to make sure that we keep those units in decent, safe condition for the next generation is really important. I think also, we've talked a lot about MIH and what's going on across the city in the private market, continuing to leverage that private market. And I think it is exciting to see what's going to happen in the next years. And I'm looking forward to the next state of the city to kind of see how this plays out.
What do you mean leveraging?
So right now, if the private market in certain areas, in the hot markets, is building rental housing, they can get a density bonus in certain areas, and that density is basically going to pay for affordable units. So it can have a significant impact if we're seeing the rate of building, to continue.
Do the suburbs matter in this conversation? Should we be talking regionally as well as just in the 5 boroughs when we talk about the affordable housing stock in what is probably an integrated economy, New York City and the immediate suburbs? I'll stay with you.
Absolutely. So last year, Governor Cuomo funded a 5-year housing plan. He doubled capital investment for the state. It's really a significant move. Most of that is focused on supportive housing for the homeless. But I think on the policy side, there's a lot more that the state can do to encourage density along the transit lines. And, we're doing what we can in New York City. We have a great housing plan, but certainly we need to be thinking beyond the 5 boroughs as well.
Let me play a what if, or two if we have time. What if the city just said, as a matter of policy, you may not build here for the next 10 years unless you're building to these income levels? Would the private market support it? Would the profit be enough for developers to build affordable housing and nothing else if the city were to mandate such a thing? What do you think?
The thing that I think people maybe don't necessarily fully understand is that the cost of building affordable housing isn't necessarily cheaper than building market rate housing. What makes it affordable, is really the financing programs, the cost of land, or whether or not, the tenant is coming with some form of rental subsidy. So, the market is not going to solve the affordable housing crisis. Government's thoughtful action and deep investment is what is going to solve the affordable housing crisis. And I think we need to.
That's a lot of tax dollars.
It's a lot of tax dollars that have to be prioritized for this, and and I think that's a critically important piece.
Then let me put out one more what if. When Hurricane Harvey hit Houston, and we learned how vulnerable it was to flooding because of the construction there and the nature of it, we also learned that they have a lot more affordable housing relative to the population because they basically don't do zoning. People can put up whatever they want, wherever they want, as long as the market will bear, and that yields more affordable housing, they said. Could something like that ever work in New York?
No. No. And I'll tell you why. I think what a lot of people don't realize is that New York is an as-of-right city. 90+% of our building happens as of right.
As of right, meaning developers just have the right to build whatever they want.
You have a certain location where you have a certain amount of density you're allowed to build, a certain height, and it's very well calibrated for the most part with where the transit is, where the services are. So where we need to focus is to find opportunities for increasing that density. Affordability and density go together. In Houston, you may be able to get 1 and 2 family affordable homes. It is very, very difficult in New York City. And
because we can't take advantage of sprawl like they can down there.
We don't have the land to sprawl.
Yes.
We have a population that will be 9 million by 2040. Our city is built along transit lines. All the new cities now are talking about TODs. We have been TOD for the last 100 years.
TOD is?
Transit-oriented development.
Yes.
And if you look at the numbers of housing that have been built in the city, for instance, in the last year, we get building at the 1 to 6 unit level. It's not that we don't get, and we get a lot of it. 87% of our buildings last year were in the 1 to 6 family homes, but they were 24% of the total production. The real workhorses in New York City for affordable housing are buildings that are 13 stories and higher. That's where 50% of our housing was produced in those buildings. And if you go even higher, and the big the super talls that everyone's afraid of, the buildings that were 40 stories and taller, 1% of the total buildings that were built, but were 22% of the housing, and also a significant percentage of the affordable housing.
And on that advocacy for density and height, we are out of time, though that could start a whole other half-hour show,
easily.
which maybe you 3 will have to come back and do. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
And that's our program for this week. You can also find me on the radio weekdays from 10 till noon on WNYC, 93.9 FM and AM 820. Tomorrow, how cable news in the 1980s helped bring about the culture wars of today. I'm Brian Lehrer. Thanks for watching.